customer watched. Okay, cool. So a customer watched our last video and passed it along to their TAM that they're very interested in what we're working on, and they'd love to see us continue that. I think they put that on the extensible issues epic, so that was pretty cool. Last week we left off with a bunch of questions. I spent some time yesterday kind of going through those and answering them as best I could. I think the purpose for today, the outcome we would like to have is a next smallest step to take in terms of implementation while we continue to work on the broader vision and where we want to go. I think, Sarah, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you would like to get work started in 13.3, is that correct?
Yeah, so I'd love to spend 13.2 on solution validation. So I was hoping one of the outcomes of today would be a rough plan for the scope, how the health team might drive solution validation for the part that we're going to contribute to. We don't have to figure out the whole scope today, but a rough plan leaving this meeting so that Amelia and I can get started would be awesome.
Okay. So I think we accomplished all that, refining the proposal vision, clear iterative implementation plan, and then coming away with some DRIs. Does it sound good to everyone else? Yes? No? I am going to add, we can clean up the notes doc later, but just for the sake of keeping notes, I'm going to put in some bullet point list for today. And anyone can feel free to add notes, questions, agenda items. I think the purpose above is what we like to get to today, so I'm not gonna like write that out again under today. The first thing, does it sound like maybe the agenda could be like, sorry, we can review question QA from last week, and then discuss next steps / clarify things. Does that sound like a good starting point? Cool. I will go ahead and share my screen so that we can walk through this together. And let's see here. You should be able to see this now. I'm going to pop open the Epic. And kind of going back through the questions that I copied over to here. And I think the first one was, what should the base level ishable contain? And also future complications would, what would make it be promoted to base level? My initial answer to this, which you guys can read, I don't need to gloss over necessarily. I think we have to understand backwards compatibility for what we have now and what's like on an issue itself, and make sure that we support that. But I think some of those things that are on an issue itself should be converted to a like whatever we call a complication type thing over the long run. At the very minimum, I think everything that isn't issuable would have to have a title. I think you'd have to define a type. So that way we can have the logic that we need in order to make sure we show the complications we need based on what type it is. And then discussions. I think we have the notes and stuff broken out to its own class and from the code. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But this could be, the way that I was looking at it is more or less like if there's ever a need to collaborate on a given object from within the object via like a discussion, it seems to me that would like be more or less what defines an issuable. And we can get into the naming below, but like that would be a merge request is the same thing. Like we have snippets that have discussions on them, which is almost like a slightly different form of a merge request in a repo all grouped into one like file, which I think is an interesting type thing. We can talk about that further. But I think the essential intent for issue tracking is to make it so that there's a single source of truth for people to collaborate on an idea from like inception to when it's done or realized. And so I think anything that falls into that, like an incident, it's the same thing. Is like you need to collaborate on the root cause, you need to fix the incident, and then it's done, right? The other one that seemed universal is participants. Like if you are having a discussion, you're going to have people participate and collaborate on that. And then along with that, notifications is another part of it. So if you're collaborating, you're going to have notifications to stay up to date and you're not in GitLab. And then confidentiality is another one that I've seen where we have confidential issues, we have confidential epics, and now upon creation, confidential merge requests. And then we discussed, I think briefly, confidential incidents, especially for those that are sensitive that need to remain hidden as you work through them. It seems like that's like a blanket attribute or behavior of an issuable that should probably be true of anything that we create in the future, regardless of what type it is, that it can be confidential. And then labels, I was on the fence with this one. We could leave it like as a complication that, you know, each issue type could decide to use or not. But it's also like the smallest primitive we have for labeling things into different sets and groupings. So it seemed like that maybe should be tied as a default, like it's always part of a base issuable type thing. Anybody have questions about this, or do we want to have a like brief discussion on it? And I can capture the notes actually in the epic itself.
Out of curiosity, Gabe, are there any use cases where we've heard of where labels aren't wanted?
I have not heard of any. I've heard of label overload, which is part of why like type is a direction to reduce that label fatigue. But in terms of like eliminating it entirely, no. I think there might be less of a need if we have custom fields in the future to use labels. So yeah.
Okay.
Information I have at the moment. Yeah, go ahead.
So right now we use incident label as like a fake type or informal type. Have we considered the thought of tying labels as the type? So I can set a label and then that defines kind of what type an issue is.
Yeah, but the thing about that is that would open Pandora's box to having issues be things that can be, what's the term in engineering, polymorphic, like you can take on multiple different types at different times and change, which would be difficult to build against, I would think. Right. So if you want to have an issue, you can promote it to an epic, but then what if you want to turn an epic back into an issue? What happens to all the data that's associated to it? Does it just like go away? Does that relationship disappear? And then we would have the added complexity of like when you're creating your labels, you would have to do some added configuration to specify that it can be a type, you know, or you could basically say like promote this scope label set to issue types or something like that. But then it wouldn't give you the ability further on to then customize what is on each of your own types of issues in a clean way. And it's almost like I like the small primitive, but I also don't want to like build on top of it for things that maybe it shouldn't be used for. I guess that's the best way to say it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
But that's a good idea. And I would like to see if there are things where we can, like if we make type of first class field, like reuse as much as we can within that experience to make it so that you don't have to navigate to other places. What would you guys like to continue using labels in incident, or would you like to have a field where it basically says, or an icon that says like this is an incident somewhere very
the latter.
Okay.
The latter. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then I was basically proposing we could extrapolate out like all the other things that are existing on issues into these complications or type, whatever we want to call them. I'm not the best at naming, and it's a personal thing. So like I would like us to come up with that name as a group, but that then could be optional. Another reason why I think we should take this approach out of the gate is like we're getting to a place with epics where epics need assignees now, you know, and like need all these things that are already on issues. So we're just recreating the same stuff just in a different first class object. And if we were to step back and be like, okay, well, why can't all issuable type things have assignees? And why can't they all, instead of doing it in a kind of half-baked reverse engineering manner? Are we in agreement on the basic outline here? Or should we change it? Because once we like have a good conversation, I'm going to update the description with the outcomes of what we think.
Could you talk through a little bit about why you think assignee would be a complication rather than part of the base level?
I think that would be to provide flexibility because in the future, we don't know what we're going to do and how this could evolve. And if you set it as like a requirement, then you could get into a situation in the future like we're at with incidents where there's this thing on an issuable that you don't want, that then like we have to go and do like a reverse. So I would even be okay if we put labels into like the existing, like that we put out into a complication. So that way these are all like base things that are part of collaboration, more or less. And then these are all things for adding data attributes to like the issuable. So maybe it would make sense to just put that. So that way, what I don't want to do is get in the same situation we're at a year from now. So if we start with like the assumption that there might be something in the future that doesn't need it, was my rationale, but it could be wrong.
I agree with that. I think for that reason, we should move labels to be a complication that can be added. Does anyone see a reason why it should remain part of the base?
Sorry.
Awesome. Thanks for asking that question, Gabe. Oh, go for it.
I'm trying to click on mute. So, I mean, so I'm sorry if I understand the question correctly. We're advocating moving it out of the base. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, we want to give people the option to not have labels on something. And I think there's numerous use cases where you could add it. You can create a type
I was just curious.
and add it. We're just not making it required.
Okay.
I'd like to make the proposal maybe to even consider taking confidentiality out of the base as well for the same reasons.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
And I think the goal and this is where engineers will be able to weigh in more on this. I think the goal, that's fine, as long as it is easy to make like a plug and play type thing, right? Because in the future, we don't want to make it so that it takes a month to get confidential something or other, whatever it is in the future. Like it should be a toggleable. You can make this thing confidential or not, and that's an option, but you don't have to do any other engineering beyond just that when you're considering a new type of thing. Because I think we ran into that with epics where, I don't know, we spent 2 releases working on confidential epics, Keenan, and it's only like 25 to 50% done and only is applicable to when you create a new object. So like,
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with moving out as long as like our approach to these other things is similar to where it's not a ton of work to make an issue type support something.
Yeah, I'm kind of unsure of the line we're drawing here because I feel like technically we can throw everything into that list outside of like title and
description.
type. Yeah. Is that what we're saying?
You would have to specify, yeah, more or less. You'd have to specify title, right? I think everything has to have that, a type, so that you know what complications are available to it. And then discussion, we can make that optional too, but then you're at a point where like you just have this base thing that is, I guess it's where I'm trying to have an object that can be reused to all these different jobs, but that still like all those jobs should revolve around collaboration of some sort. So I don't know. I'm open to anything. This is just my first take on it. So if you think we should move everything into that, then.
Is anyone opposed to making the requirements for the base issue title, type, and discussion?
I think if you have discussion, you have to have, I mean, that's where these two kind of go hand in hand. Like if you're going to have a discussion, you're going to have people that are discussing, which means you're going to have participants. This is also widely used for how people watch issues. So like if you subscribe to it, more or less, and the notifications go also in line with subscribing to an issue to watch it right now. So I would be opposed to that, mainly because unless we move discussion to be something that is not in the base, and if that's not in the base, then these 3 things basically has to be always linked together, like as one complication type, because they all play into each other, if that makes sense.
Well, why do you need to see the participants?
You don't need to see them. Like, I think I never even look at the participants because we only show, you can see down here, I see there's 10 and I can see 6 faces and then 3 more. And so like it doesn't add a lot of value for me. So maybe we should put that into like an optional type thing. Notifications is watching.
Yeah. So the feedback we get is folks are like, well, why do you have participants but not assignees? So it actually like it actually causes more confusion on the customer end by having that on epics.
I'm a
So-
fan of going with the 3 and then attempting to validate the need for the others as part of the core, personally.
Okay. I'm just gonna
Are we
see
including
those.
description as part of discussion?
No.
So that should probably be added to the base.
I would make that extra 'cause in the mock-up that I saw from incidents, they didn't have a description. It looked like it just had some other data. But if that was something that we feel should be there, but I'm not sure. What do you think, Sarah? Also worth validating, but
mean-
give me a minute to think on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's more just from the GitLab side of things, like always stating the why is important. Like, what is this thing and why are we doing it? But
That's
my
what I was
first thought.
going to add. In our sticky header research, we found that people would go to the description if the title wasn't very descriptive or was a little vague. And some people may prefer to keep titles very succinct, in which case a description would be useful. So I'm a fan of having a description field as well.
what if the description is not applicable? Like, because I wouldn't see it's necessarily, well, maybe it could be applicable to an incident, but if you, yeah, you maybe want to keep succinct, like findings at the top level there.
And it
I
just
think
be-
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I mean, I can dive into how an incident is structured. We're going to need to think about the different fields that we add to it, but you have an overview, which is a handful of really important fields that help you figure out where to start investigation. You have an associated payload, which can be anywhere from 5 to 500 fields, depending on how your tools are configured. And then you have a section where people are adding notes. So depending on the decisions that we make today, we would need to be prescriptive in saying, okay, we're using the description complication, and that's where we put the payload, or that's what we designate for incident notes, or that's the overview, so on and so forth. I haven't thought through that part. I got a little lost in the question now. Are we suggesting that a description needs to be part of the base issue, and that is what we're talking about?
Yes.
I would say yes. I think a description should be a required part of the base.
Cool. The one thing the reason why I bring this up is because we've shoved a lot of stuff into the Markdown editor, so it can render lots of things. Like it can render images, and you can embed things into it like charts and all sorts of stuff. But it also, that makes refactoring and ongoing maintenance of the Markdown editor like a nightmare. And I've heard that, like, in Donald, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's like a legitimate fear of ever like having to work on it and make changes because it's so like lots of things combined together. So like if we go this approach and you're like, hey, well, we could put the payload in the description. Would you want the payload to have to basically be styled like a markdown way, or would you want to have some sort of custom rendering that then like makes it look a certain way that's different, that's unique to incidents, I guess is what I'm saying.
I'm going to retract my previous comment. I don't think that the description, I don't think that the description needs to be required based on the information you just gave me about the Markdown editor. It seems as though we should probably tease that apart into different subsets of functionality and then make those available complications for people to add depending on their use cases.
Yes, that's where I was thinking about that, because then it makes it easier to maintain. So like if you want to embed a chart from Sisense or something, instead of like adding it to the Markdown, like just add a chart from Sisense and make that like an attachment that you can do that renders it nicely like on the issue itself, right? Without it being inside the description field.
Yes, I agree. And if someone wants a description field, then we've enabled, some subset of the Markdown functionality in that, and they can call it whatever they want instead of the word description, which may not be applicable to any use case because it's so ambiguous.
Okay. So consider, are we in agreement with that?
Sounds like some consensus.
Cool. We can revisit this, of course. We're gonna like validate this stuff as we go. For the sake of time, I'm gonna move on from this. If you have more thoughts afterwards, drop them in line, and I'll at some point in the next day or two go back and update the description, the main description up top with these things that are kind of takeaways. So don't feel rushed if you're not super comfortable talking in large groups, and sometimes I'm not either. So, okay, what features, components comprise issues, epics, MRs today that will be converted to a complication? I would say outside of the things that we deem like the base up top, all of them in some form or fashion. So like merge requests is a good example. Approvals is one that could be used across lots of different things. I think definitely as we look at workflows, we look at assignees and dates and all those things. There's sometimes where like you don't ever really need those fields, and you might not want to have them take up real estate, right? There's sometimes where they are important, and then when we basically get to custom fields eventually. Anyways, I would just say like the simpler we can keep the underlying thing, and then the more we can make each complication be easily adaptable to any of the issue types, the better. Thoughts on this? Pushback?
No, that sounds good. Just to add some more context, part of the work that the health group will do in contributing to this project for the larger GitLab is potentially convert whatever features we decide should be part of the base into complication, kind of a standalone little application that you can add to stuff. I imagine that'll be part of the work that we do.
Okay. Probably going to convert whatever term to view base plus complications into their underlying constructs.
Yeah, Clement or Crystal to disagree or say we don't know enough.
So we're talking about building a UI to help support the extensibility, potentially?
No, we're talking about converting discussion or title or issue type into something that can be placed in different issue types. I was not talking about creating a UI for people to do this. I was saying that we would abstract that functionality into an application. That makes sense, or I confuse more?
No, I think the end user customization via UI is like way down the road. that's the end goal. And like the vision, it'd be great to allow users to do that. And whatever we can do is the first small steps to like move towards the vision of where we want to be, while getting incidents their own experience that they need as quickly as possible without taking shortcuts.
Yeah, so we're talking about our teams helping with the refactoring, and I think that we'll be able to help, but we probably won't be able to move it as fast as the plan team because they have the domain knowledge.
Okay. Well, if like we want to start doing this in 13.3, we can figure out how to allocate resources to support that, whether that gets an engineer to pair with or somebody like, and I think Donald and Jake, we can continue to talk about this, but having a DRI on our side who's front end and back end to support the health group, just like, so they know it's something like whenever health group is blocked or has questions about this or wants to pair, however we can help support the effort, even if that's like taking on some of the work ourselves proper, we can figure out how to do a joint roadmap. Anything else to add to this one? Okay, cool. Could someone, I don't know who wrote this last time, could they clarify the question? Because I was confused. At what point does a complication become a new complication?
I didn't write that, but I think what it means is at what point do we decide that maybe more than one, like maybe there's more than one use case for an attachment to an issuable, how do we turn that into a complication so others can use it?
I read that as, oh,
No, go please.
if people want to customize the complications and change them to fit their use case, I think, how do we prevent, multiplication of very similar complications, or create ways to efficiently collaborate on changes to complications? So I think that boils down to who owns each complication and how do we control production of new ones.
That's like an ongoing governance problem, which I think goes back to like stewardship and like almost the community can contribute things. And I think we need to specify frameworks for it. I would say there like general constraints would be like you shouldn't, I wouldn't think that within the complication itself, you would specify like only support type X, Y, and Z or whatever. And maybe the engineers can weigh in here, but like maintaining a library of what they do and don't do, and then good practices around how to do it. Like, I don't know a better way to solve for that problem other than like, you shouldn't duplicate things like in data and workflows and things that are surfacing. So I don't know, does anybody have a better idea other than that?
No, I think you're right, Gabe. I think it's the only way I know to do it.
So like, I mean, we'll probably get a lot more of these when we get into doing solution validation and whatnot, but like an attachment manager is an interesting thing of like, well, what are you attaching? Are you attaching, what types of files are you attaching? Like at what point, like as things naturally evolve, at what point is something deviating from the behavior of how this thing is supposed to work? And you end up writing a bunch of if statements. Usually like I would say that's when you might want to like consider splitting. But I think we'll have to figure this out together ongoing as a team. And
no, it's kind of a similar governance challenge to like a component library, like where you're trying to make a component flexible and you eventually get to the point where it's got a bajillion conditionals and then you need one or more new components. Yeah. I don't know if there's any process around that at GitLab that like exists for governing those changes, but could steal some learnings from.
Pajamas is probably a good one, I would say. I mean, I'm sure they're going through it to a certain degree. All right, next question. What terms should we use moving forward? Open here. I think, Amelia, if you want to verbalize your thing, and then I can kind of verbalize my thing, and then we can go through this a little bit.
Sure. I think I've always had a little bit of confusion about the difference between issuable and issue types. So I guess I wanted to make sure I was following how we were using those terms here to make sure that, I guess I was just following them correctly, because those words have always caused a lot of confusion for me. Your diagram helped me to understand that. It sounds like we're not talking about issue types as they're defined now, but issuables and issuable types, which you can see in your diagram. And then it looks like Clement had a comment in response to this that I would give a +1 to as well. The word complication is the only one for me that still every time I hear it, I think I have to take a second to think about what that actually means, and maybe widget is a possibility there as well.
Cool. Yeah, I'm game with that. I'll get to that. Do widget.
Team widget +1.
All right. So yeah, I think along that line, why I didn't want to go this initial route of having issuable, then you have an issue, then you have issue types is you're adding another abstraction where this is basically like a data classification and maybe like it could change some things. But what some customers have expressed is that they don't even like the word issue. Like, and we have to call it something. And like, is a default, but they might want to change issue to never see that in the user interface again and have it be called user story or who knows what, right? And I think like this sort of kind of flat approach also kind of simplifies things a little bit too, because we're not having to worry about like another nested like decision tree. But the kind of basic idea is like we eventually work towards having like your base issuable, whatever you want to call it, and then literally issue types or type, we can just call them types of things. You have a snippet, an epic, and these all pull from the same like underlying little mini app type things. Like if you want to have a widget library, and a widget A, widget B, widget C, you know, you can just plug it into these different things in a very straightforward way. And I think it might take us a while to get there from an architecture standpoint, but eventually getting to the point where you can like click a button to enable like a widget for a given issue type, you know, and we might have to put some real constraints over that, and we'll see how that evolves. But I think that's the basic vision for it. And I think, Justin, you are very much for widgets, right?
Yeah, I was going to add too on the issuable stuff. Like issuable, the term doesn't have to even necessarily be customer facing. Like we could just call them types of artifact. I don't know. We can. I'm not as good at naming either, Gabe. But I think I like the flat model better.
Do we need to have the word issuable as well? I think that's one of the things Justin might have been getting at. Could we just call it issue types and then widgets?
Well, issue types is a feature function we're also probably going to build soon. So that.
Well, this enables us in some way to have issue types if we build this, right?
Yes.
This would be.
I'm probably just overthinking it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where, Keeney, your initial thing was like, this is what customers are asking for right here, is like to have issuable or issues and then a type bug, a type feature. And we could build this, but it's like adding another layer of abstraction on top of the issue instead of saying, what if you step back and you make it more generalized and you can create a bug, you can create an issue, or you could rename issue to foobar, and that's what you call it, you know? So it solves the same problem just in a like kind of more flat way that also, I think if done correctly, would cause the least confusion to people in the long run about like configuration and stuff like that. That's my hypothesis, at least.
And I guess this might be implementation details. We can talk about it later, but this would also enable hierarchy. Certain types can fit under certain types, correct?
That would be probably one of the behaviors, yes, we would want to talk about in terms of like base things that can happen. Like we're having the same discussion right now in a working group about merging groups and projects together for the same thing where like you have stuff at the group level, you need a project level, and why not just have one thing that has behaviors of like how it can define relationships. And I think hierarchical is one form of the way that we would want to do that.
Okay.
There's also been an interesting proposal for looking at like more of a network graph type like approach, but that gets a little confusing. Anyways, implementation details, I would say.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, captured the outcomes of that thing. Incident management is driving urgency around this. What are the current pain points with issues that immediately need to be resolved? I think, Sarah, you added some points here. Do you want to talk through this at all before I talk through the next point?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk through the main problems to be solved. But as we touched on earlier, you know, there are multiple different solutions we could take to solving those. Is this the call in which we want to dive into those? I've also outlined it in that issue. So I'd love for people to dig into that one first. And then maybe we dig into the main problems to be solved with incident management with a smaller focus group. I think this is more for the larger, how we are tackling extensible issues. Perhaps I'm wrong. What do you think?
I think whatever would help folks understand, it might help folks understand like the scope of what extensibility means. You know, like it should be able to solve all these problems, like if done correctly.
Great. So I've talked about the structure of an incident before. You're going to have the alert payload. You're going to have a editable note section. We're going to want some sort of widget whereby someone can build an event timeline. Here's a decent mock-up. We need assignees. We need to be able to link to different collaboration channels. The main problem we're trying to solve is context switching. Context switching between GitLab and an external tool, and then context switching between different parts of GitLab's application. So as you can see, looking at the vision mockup we have here, on the left-hand side, you've got a whole, I think there's 6 different areas of the operations product that you can navigate to. Our goal is to bring those to a more central place that you can easily navigate in between, to share information and allow people to narrow in on the root cause as quickly as possible. From a collaboration perspective, people are gonna need access to a real-time collaboration platform, Zoom, and then chat ops. So that would be our Slack integration. So locating that on the issue makes it the single source of truth, helping us reduce context switching. Problems that we will solve later, so after the main ones that I just described, is going to be some sort of documentation. So that's going to come from the timeline that you build, that's going to come from the linked run books, that's going to come from the embedded charts, kind of the snapshot in time of what happened at the time of the incident. And we may add that post-incident review functionality to the incident. We're not sure on that one, but to summarize, reduce context switching internally and externally, provide quick and easy access to where collaboration is happening, and give people an easy way to clearly understand all of the observability artifacts that they need to sort through to figure out root cause. If you have more questions on that, check out this business case that Dave is showing.
I think that's really great stuff. Thank you for the overview. I think it also has lots of, like, if you think back about that life cycle that was Sarah just described, of where like you have all this like context that you need in one place, or that typically go to lots of different places. This builds on top of the value proposition of GitLab being a single application and being able to pull everything together seamlessly into like one object. But then it's similar to issue tracking, where like at the end of the thing, you might want to do a report on it, you know, like a postmortem, and where does that get saved and how do you access it, which could eventually play into like a wiki somehow or some sort of other function like that. But you have the same thing that happens in planning, where at the end of a sprint cycle or whatever, you want to go and do a postmortem or a retrospective to capture notes, and that should be saved somewhere. So like, I think the more that we look at like the life cycle of something, and then how people store information, there's a lot of overlap, which is why I think this is especially exciting to figure out how to like solve this together. Like when you want to add documentation, how can we do the same thing for the end of a planning cycle or whatever to capture what we've learned? Because right now we use an issue for a retrospective that gets closed and then filed away. And I don't know if we ever go back and look at it, and it's just kind of, anyways, I'm geeking out a little bit, but I'm excited. So cool. I think that's one of the problems. And then also just the overarching type, like if you haven't watched the video that I put up here, I would recommend that. And it's really like goes back to the fact that everything is subtle enough in the way that the interactions happen on the issuable that it literally causes psychological discomfort. And I did a lot of research on this over the last week, just trying to understand, well, why does it matter if a button is like one row into the right different between an issue and an MR or an epic? And it's like, is one person that we did an interview for explains, like, you have to maintain a cognitive model in your head about how each thing works, where you're at, and they're all the same functions that you're trying, like the same things that you need to do to interact with that issue, but they're all presented in slightly different ways that like it's taxing, and it makes me like cringe almost, is how it was described. So I think that's one of them. And then the other, as we get into doing more things later on with like workflows and how things flow through a given process, which all sorts of planning objects or even incidents probably will have some sort of, state that they move through. Like what does that look like? And then how do we allow different types of issuables to go through different workflows and also have a consistent like user experience across that and interaction model. Like if I work with issues, I understand how the workflow works. If I work with incidents, it basically works the same way. And it's like easy for me to switch between these two different objects and understand how they fit into the GitLab as a product, instead of being like completely different experience as a whole. I think that's one of the other problems we want to eventually work towards solving in a better way. Does that answer the question, or do we want to push on a little bit if it's not enough or accurate?
It seemed pretty good to me.
Okay, cool. And the urgency just around incident management needs to make a decision now. And so we need to support that instead of wasting a bunch of effort that we could put towards other things on recreating things that already exist. So that's the urgency. And I think it's good urgency. What potential iterations would the monitor health team be able to work on that will help drive both goals? Ideally, we can reach incidents in 3 milestones. That would be great. I'm supportive of that. What I had proposed was just like base abstraction for types, and then whatever new complications are necessary in the base library to support incidents. I think, at some point we might need to, like, we can't refactor everything at the same time, but we should start refactoring things at least to the point where you can get what you need within incidents within like the model that we're working towards. And then we can continue to like refactor some of the other objects to bring them in line with like how we want to do this. And we might also run into the case where like create maybe merge requests, they don't want to be a part of it and they want to like go a completely different direction. And like, we should be supportive of that too. And I think that's the next point was like, should we get, create involved in this and vulnerabilities? Yes, let's do that. But for this one, I think, Sarah, do you want to verbalize what you mentioned?
Yeah. And I think that has to do with our conversation above. We've mostly made a decision on what the base one should include. And so we're going to need to abstract and refactor those functionalities into their own applications. The smaller we make the base, the more refactoring it's going to take us. So I think we answered it above, and then we'll be able to move faster if we're able to create a joint roadmap with the plan team.
Cool. Yeah, I think I would always say like the least amount of work you need to do to get the results that you need. But I would also caveat that with like, let's not take shortcuts and let's do things correctly so that we don't run into quality issues down the road and we don't like have a bunch of overlapping solutions that are difficult to maintain. So like, I think once we commit to this, we need to sort of like commit to it. And if we have to make it a two-way door, that would be better so that we can always walk back if we have to. But I think, yeah, I almost would leave this up to the engineers to drive the how. So.
Yeah. So I think first step is Jake and I need to sit down and talk through or come up with a design on how the base abstraction is going to look like. And then we can kind of figure out a roadmap for how to build widgets off of that. And then once we have that established, we can figure out where we need help in building those widgets or even the base abstraction.
What other engineers want to be part of that conversation? I mean, you all can do it YouTube, but would it be helpful if like Coolmet or any other front end, back end engineers were present?
Yeah, I've got an engineer. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm happy to be added in it.
Yeah, I have an engineer on the back end team who's following along with the planning as well. It's Peter.
Yeah, we'll add a few engineers from plan also.
Yeah.
Cool. So for next steps here, can I basically say engineers, you are going to self-organize to answer this thing? Like at least the best way to approach this?
Yep.
Yeah, that works.
Okay, cool.
Do we think, should we set some sort of when we'll check back in on your proposed solution? Do you have any idea?
We can probably schedule something by next week to talk through that.
Yeah, we can do this parallel to doing solution validation, because I think solution validation is going to be more along like the user experience and like validating that. I think we would need to do the business viability validation. So like it aligns with the business needs and it aligns with more or less what the user needs, right? And then the engineering part is doing the feasibility. Like, can we actually build this and does it make sense? And as long as we have that answer before we start building it, like I would leave it up to y'all to decide whatever timeline. If we want to start building this in 13.3, then we would need the feasibility, like risk mitigated by before then. So. Did I capture that accurately? Is that cool?
Yeah, I think we can take it from there.
All right. Next one, does secure also need to be part of the scation? Vulnerabilities may need to be issuables in future. Yeah, I also think it was brought up, create. Donald, you said that. Who should we pull in from create, do you think? Would it be Daniel Grusso or, I mean, because Kai also has snippets, I think. So do you have a recommendation?
On the front end, it would be Andre. Maybe Darva?
I think James should probably be able to delegate and grab the right people. He's the group PM for that, I think.
Folks from the anything else? Should I ping anyone else right now? Says James.
I tagged Sam, but I'm wondering if we should grab David. We're just
if you want to
response.
If you want to ping them, and
yep.
Sarah, you can be responsible for people on the ops side, and I'll follow up with James and make sure that we get somebody from the create side here.
Great.
What is the official definition of an initiable? I think the question was like, why? What target are we trying to hit?
They were actually, it was two separate questions. The official definition of an issuable and then the target that we're trying to hit or the problem we're trying to solve.
I don't know what the definition is. I think that's something that Holly, you proposed, like changing the essential intent of issue tracking to be like a little bit simpler and less GitLab-y, which I'm going to follow up with you on, and I think it's great. But I think we should decide what is the definition of an issuable. I think I know what the targets we're trying to hit are, but in terms of what it is, I don't really know.
Do you see this new piece of functionality living alongside existing issues and merge requests and epics at some point for a period of time, or would they attempt to replace those?
I don't think the end user will ever know a difference. I'll put it that way. Like we shouldn't, between what we have now and like the thing that we're working towards, like at some point, the way the issues are now should inherit this behavior, and it could still be called an issue. If create is in on this and wants to like do the joint thing, then like the merge requests, like theoretically, if we were to replace it with this today, it could look exactly like it does now, just with like some different stuff behind the scenes. And then in the future, you can add new things and have more control over it, I think. I don't know if we would like have, we might at some point definitely have like an incident that has slightly different like things working behind the scenes. And it might take a little while to get issues and some of the other existing things caught up to speed with like this kind of new approach. But I don't think it would like overlap or duplicate what is already in the product, if that makes sense.
Does. Thank you.
Do we want to take a stab at defining it? Is there value in that? Because I'm happy to try.
That would be really valuable for me, but I don't know if we have time for it today.
Cool. Yeah, we're a couple minutes over. I'll take that as an action. Will people asynchronously? It will take item to work on definition. I would love input from everyone on this because yeah, it's
yep, absolutely.
Defining thing is hard too, but I do have a pretty good clarity on like what we're trying to hit, and that's improving SMAL for every stage that uses issuables. So literally, like if we do a better job of cross-linking things, sort of like what Sarah was saying, where you have all these things that span different areas of the product, how can you bring them all into one place so you reduce context switching, make it easier to adopt these features, make it easier to make it context relevant, instead of going to a list and searching for things, give people what they need, where they need it, when they need it. That's going to drive SMAL for every stage that integrates into this thing, which is great. I think that also driving cross-stage adoption. So the more, basically some of the data that we're seeing, the more stages per user somebody uses, the more likely they are to convert. And that's even more relevant with stages per active namespace. So the more stages that a top-level namespace adopts, the like each additional one, I think their conversion rate improves by 3 times or something crazy like that. And I think like we want to drive cross-stage adoption, and issues are kind of like a core thing in the product that allows you to do that. And then another one would be setting up issuables for extensible and customizable workflows per type, basically long-term. So that's the targets we're trying to hit. Questions on that? Nope. Okay. So that's all the things. I think next steps, what do we want the next steps to be?
So we came up with DRIs for engineering, and they have a next step. I think that we should come up with DRIs for solution validation, and just throwing it out there. Gabe, you and I, Amelia from the operations side, Holly. Do you have multiple UX designers on the plan team?
We do.
Nick's here.
Nick and
sorry. Nick, sorry, both of you. I only see Holly in my video view. I apologize. Nice. That seems like a great group to have another synchronous conversation and come up with a solution validation plan. Yeah?
Yeah. Come up with plan.
I'm happy to schedule that this week if everyone's comfortable with me finding a time on all our calendars.
Absolutely. And then I think from that, maybe when we have that call, we can figure out if all of the UX folks don't want to be involved, and like we just want to have one person drive it because everybody else wants to spend time doing other things that they feel are more important. We could assign a DRI, like a specific one, or I like doing the group stuff when things are this big too. So I would love to see like all of the UX folks that we have participate as well. So please schedule that, Sarah. I'm excited about it. And I think that, I think we have an alignment on timelines and goals, especially like at some point I would just say for the engineers, if you start talking like this is like not going to work and it's not feasible, the sooner you can tell us that, the better, or the sooner we need to change, like fundamentally change the proposal. I think we should discuss those trade-offs as early as possible. And I expect us to need to have those conversations on trade-offs. So please like bring them up as they happen, because that will impact like solution validation to a certain degree and give us the ability to like change things and change what we're pitching and how we're asking questions if we have to. So the more we can have like ongoing collaboration about current state of things, the better.
The one risk I would call out as you start those conversations for solution validation is just thinking about the migration, like what and when will need to be migrated to whatever new structure is existing, because that like the initial creation of this stuff seems, you know, hard but not impossible, but the migration of existing you know, corpus of issues and things like that is going to be a tricky challenge, I'm sure.
Yep, that's a good thing to say. I wonder, we have the same potential problem on like projects groups. So I'm wondering if like we were to roll this out and let's say you had to migrate your group or project to like whatever the thing is that the merge thing is, maybe at the same time you could migrate to whatever this type of thing is. Like figuring out how to roll that out so it was a clean one time when you convert into this new thing, it will let you have like what is essentially like a merge group and project and then like these extensible issue types. So
we'll call it next gen projects. No one's ever called anything that though.
Next gen, yeah, you could call it that. We'll see. But good, thanks for calling that out. Any other like huge risks that we want to highlight in the last 1 minute, since I'm already 9 minutes over? Sorry about that. Bad timekeeper.
I'm really excited. I'm impressed with this meeting. There's a lot of people on this call, and I've not seen a call be so productive. So thanks, everybody.
Wonderful. Appreciate it. Please be async in the Epic. I would love ongoing feedback and discussion on the proposal.
I'll post a recording in the Slack channel. Have a great day, everyone.
Ciao.
Everybody.